All right, hello. We are back to talk about a little mini unit. So this isn't going to be a larger unit with multiple exercises and a culminating project. We are just going to talk about one technique, and you will have a corresponding sketchbook exercise, and that will be it for this sort of exploratory little unit. So this unit then will go into your sketchbook and you will save it. I will ask for it with the submission of the larger unit coming up next. So this is going to be a little mini unit. I'm going to do a little lecture on it, and then you again will have an exercise on that. So to start off, I'm going to share a little PowerPoint with you. All right, so today we are talking about texture. So again, everything that we do in drawing is to create the illusion of a 3D world on a 2D plane. So when we talk about texture, we are trying to create the illusion of texture. And there are a lot of different ways to do this. This can be a really fun, kind of free-flowing exercise, a free, fun-flowing technique for you as well. So what is texture? It's the tactile nature of an object. It's the way something feels when it's touched. So we often think about things that are smooth and kind. They are soft and, something reminiscent of a good memory. They can be bumpy, they can be creepy, they can be rough or tough or hard, they can be shiny or polished, professional, they can be fuzzy and kind, or even carry like the host of something else. So they often have this sort of physical description, physical adjective, smooth, and then also something that is associated with it, like slippery and creepy. So slippery might be the adjective to describe what it is in the physical world, but creepy might be the way that we talk about it in terms of perceiving it for ourselves. So often texture comes with its own connotation. We have a tactile memory. Our brains can often visually understand how something feels just by looking at it as if we've touched a similar object before. So again, the idea of something that is slimy and creepy, probably because you've touched something slimy before and you have this association with something creepy. Or maybe you watched a movie about a snake and now every time you see that similar texture, you have that similar association. Okay, so this is a photo that I show in my photo class quite often. I ask people, what do they think when they look at this image? And I get different answers, and those have ranged from sharp, like it might be glass, or soft, like it might be ruffling paper, like it's paper pinned to a wall, or glass, like it's all sorts of reflections of different people. Neither of those is correct or incorrect, but it's a different association that we have with this image, and it gives us a sense of texture. So texture, you can always imagine if you're running your hand across it, what would it feel like? Would this be sharp? Would it cut you? Would it be kind of fluttery, like it's paper? Would it maybe paper cut you? Would it be something in between? Would it be neither of those? Those are neither correct or incorrect. Just keep thinking about what you're seeing, thinking, and feeling. So this again is macro photography. So we're looking really close up at a particular object, and this is very fibrous. It's tubular. There's a particular type of texture, and texture is a repeating element. So what repeating element creates the sensation that we are seeing, thinking, and feeling? Okay, this one also, try to think about an adjective. Is this sharp? Is it juicy? Is it delicious? Is it poisonous? Is it off-putting? What type of adjective does this make you think about? Okay, and this one also, similar but different. Repeating element that creates a type of texture. Okay, so texture is all about one particular repeating element that is created in unification across an area. So in this instance, it is that circle. What does that make you think? What does that make you feel? With drawing texture, we are trying to imitate how a material reflects light. So something that is soft will absorb and reflect light differently than something that is hard. We can do this by using a variety of different types of marks. So when we are creating this illusion of a 3D world on a 2D surface, we are using marks to communicate that. So it's all about the different type of mark that you create to make us see the illusion of a texture. That's different types of gradients between dark and light, and also the shape of the mark itself. The more varied your mark making, the wider range of textures that you will be able to achieve. There's a difference between the range of textures in the close-up of the Van Eyck painting and the Michelangelo. So Michelangelo was pretty famous for really soft, smooth gradients versus the Van Eyck, which was a lot of intricate details, a lot of small dots. So all of those small dots come together to create something that feels more, there's more depth there, there's more texture. As far as if I reached it out and felt that, I would feel more bumps, versus the Michelangelo, which has something very smooth. It's like an ocean, like ocean waves. There's nothing hard there. There's nothing that would poke me or cut me. It's all very smooth and soft. Again, neither right nor wrong, just two very different ways of creating texture. Let's talk about soft surfaces. So a soft surface absorbs a lot of light, creating smooth transitions between highlights and shadow. Examples are fabric, skin, hair, and leaves. So this image here is actually of bread. So this image you can see has light and shadow, but it could be bread, it could be a body, it could be beans, it could be some sort of fabric that has crinkles in it. It is the idea of a soft transition. There are no hard lines here. There is just a smooth gradient between light and dark. Making marks in the same direction can help create a softer, smoother look on the surface of an object, as can blurring. So by blurring, we can talk about doing that with our finger, just rubbing across the page. We can use a tool, usually a tortillon, which is the little rounded paper circle with a little point on it. We can use that to scrub on the page. We could use an eraser to smooth out those edges, or we could use a very soft pencil to really blur those edges. So all of that creates a soft edge, okay? And that makes things appear fuzzy and mixed together. And you can try a variety of those. Figure out what gets the desired look. Soft surfaces often don't have extreme highlights. So there's not going to be, the sharp highlight of a pupil or, glasses or glass or something like that. When you're talking about skin or fabric, it diffuses the light, meaning it really takes it and disperses it. So there's not going to be anything sharp. There's not going to be anything hard about that. It's just going to be soft. Okay, different kinds of fabric have different kind of textures. These will reflect light differently. Drapery can be tricky because it is both soft in that it does have very smooth gradients from light to dark, but it can also be very geometric with the way that it folds and lies. So you can both have a really soft gradient, a beautiful technical gradient from whitest white to darkest dark, but you could also have a little triangle, a sharp triangle of black because of the way the fabric drapes. So that's why often they will have drapery in almost all of the technical drawing classes in any art school across the country, across the world, because drapery is one of the ways that you can really exercise all of these skills, both a hard gradient and a soft gradient. Okay, start by drawing the basic contours of the edge of the fabric, so define it in contour like we have been, and then as well as the contours of the folds where the high parts are, and then add shading to create the shadow. Drapery often has very dark shadows and very light highlights. So also when you're thinking about this, you can do your gesture in terms of light and dark. So you can use your eraser to go in and create the lightest lights of that shape. You can also go in with your pencil or your charcoal to create the darkest darks. And as you're adding and blending, you can then get more subtle, get more detailed, get more refined from there. But that's also a great way to start your gesture drawing, is to just find the highlights, the whitest whites, and then just find the darkest shadows and go from there. There are many different types of fabric. Each has its own surface and material characteristics. All of those will be different. So crushed velvet, silk, crochet, knit, lace, all of those have a different type of feel. Often in drawing and still life, we like to use crushed velvet because it absorbs light. It's great for photography. We also like to use cotton and silk because they have wide expanses of even gradients, really soft lights and shadows. But that's not all you're going to draw. So figure out how to create the texture of crochet. Figure out how to create the texture of something knit. So if you're doing a portrait of, my grandmother who loves to knit shawls, she will probably have one draped around her shoulders. So how do you create that texture in a convincing way? It doesn't have to be hyper realistic, meaning it doesn't have to look exactly like that object, but it's a texture that convinces our eye, convinces the viewer that we are looking at something knitted or crocheted. When drawing hair, fiber, or furs, don't try to draw every strand. So that's what I was kind of getting into, was a lot of intro drawers try to do every individual hair, but that's actually not the best way to create an overall hair or an overall fabric. Instead, again, go through your range of lights and shadows, start your midtones, and then start creating the texture within those. So if we look at this rabbit here, there's a dark patch, there's some light patches, and once those have been drawn, this is Albrecht Dürer, went in and did some individual strands on top of that. But if this were every single individual strand of this rabbit, it would have been thousands upon thousands, maybe even millions of individual hairs. But instead, they went through the course of drawing something very light and then defining the outer edges with those little strands, really brushy textural strokes. So we get the idea of this rabbit, because even if we were looking at a real rabbit, our eyes would not perceive all of the tens of thousands, millions of individual strands. We would start to decipher that in terms of lights, darks, and texture. Okay, so don't get caught up in the individuals. And this is a really great way to go about that. Okay, so focus on the overall shape of the thing that you are drawing, draw in the contours, figure out where the highlights are, figure out where the shadows are, block those in, and then create your texture marks in the direction that they're moving on the object to create that individual pattern. Okay, same thing with the hair. So there's an overall shape, which is the contour, there's value, and then there's a linear texture. So there's texture marks in the direction of the way that the object is going. Okay, rough surfaces. Rough surfaces reflect light inconsistently. The light hits less of the surface and hits it only in certain areas. The deeper a dip or crevice, the rougher the texture will be. Rough surfaces may have small ridges that catch the light on a high point or an exterior point of the surface, and deeper crevices that cast shadows beyond the ridges. Having stronger contrast between light and dark helps create the illusion of a highly textured rough surface. So we talked about soft surfaces, and I talked about soft gradients that blend really smoothly between light and dark. Hard surfaces, you might have to exaggerate that. So a higher contrast between those lights and those darks. Okay, so here's some bark. The value not only shows its shows us the difference in color, but also starts to create a sense of dimension. The dark areas look like tears or splits in the bark of the tree. The darker the area, the deeper it seems. So that's part of the sensation that darkness and black tends to recede and brightness tends to come forward. And that's just the way that depth is created with value in our drawings. Okay, line direction also helps create the sense of texture and also the sense of depth and dimension. Okay, this works because our brains often associate visual chaos with rough textures. So if you have lines going this way, this way, this way, and this way, I think, okay, maybe that's bark because it has a lot of depth. It has a lot of different directions that this object is moving in versus one seamless line across. I think, okay, is that a sphere? Is that a fabric? Is that a wall? You know? Okay, hard and smooth surfaces. Hard surfaces reflect more light than soft surfaces. Some of these, such as metal or glass, are highly reflective, while others can be more porous, such as stone and wood. With all hard surfaces, the light bounces off more of the surface, creating a sharp, crisp edge and stronger contrast of light and dark. Okay, so just take a second to look at all of the individual textures in this image. Okay, and then there are some special surfaces. So let's talk about some of those. Often surfaces will fall into hard or soft, but they could also have their own individual characteristics within those. But there are some that fall outside of those, and those can be glass, mirror, metal, glitter, plastics, and some fabrics. So one of those is a reflective surface. So that's on something that is very shiny and smooth, and that bounces the light back at the viewer. So that's a little bit more complex to draw. Sometimes there will be a bright highlight on the surface, but not always. And reflections can be accurate to real life proportions, but more often they will reflect the proportion of the object they are coming from. So if this is the circular image, if we're looking at a globe, we are looking at that skewed perspective. So look at even the ceiling lines here. Those are far from straight. They are reflected onto the spherical, shiny surface that we are looking at them on. When drawing a reflected image, some artists choose to make the values slightly less varied, closer to gray or the middle tones, to show that the reflection is not a real thing. Transparency, this is a fun one. Materials like glass are transparent, meaning we can see through them. And those can be tricky to capture in a drawing because they include both the qualities of their surface, meaning smooth and shiny, but also the things that you can see through them. So if you see a reflection or some fabric through a glass that might be rough and hard, it will be somewhere in between the smooth, shiny, silky gradient versus, if we're looking at glitter, beyond that, it will be very hard and individual. So when you look at something through a transparent object, it becomes kind of the median between them both. Okay, so don't think of it as drawing something clear, just think of it as drawing the thing that is in front of you. So you're neither drawing the glass nor the glitter, you're drawing the visual representation that is in front of you. So it's somewhere in between. So that's the idea of drawing what you see, not what you know. You know that it's glass, you know that it's glitter, but what you're drawing and representing is somewhere in between. So just draw the values and shapes that you see. Okay, so this drawing here has both transparency and reflection. And sheer fabrics are materials that have their own surface texture, but also you can see through them, so you can see the thing beyond them. So again, that's somewhere in the middle, but closer to responding to the texture that it comes from. So if we're looking at this fabric right here, this is darker than a completely transparent piece of glass, but it's not quite dark enough to cover up all of those objects beyond it. So again, it's somewhere in between, but also you see a lot more of the fabric than you do the objects behind them. So again, draw what you see, draw the shapes, tones, and values that you see in front of you. Don't draw what you think you know beyond that. Don't make up the details of this pot if you can't see them. If you can't see them, you can't see them. But if you can, yes, go ahead and fill in those details. All right, and last here, this is Andrew Wyeth. I think we talked before about Christina's World, his most famous painting, but this one here is Wind from the Sea, so you can see this curtain. That's a very sheer fabric that's kind of blowing towards us, so we get the idea of the texture, we get the idea of the transparency, and we get the idea of depth and dimension, how the wind is blowing it towards us. So even in these spaces where it completely disappears, our brains start to perceive that as, oh, I know that this is a sheer curtain that's simply blowing. It doesn't disappear into the atmosphere. I know that it's just blowing beyond us. Or, I know that there are not stripes in the sky, but I know that the curtain is creating that shape within it. So again, it's a sensation of creating the textures and values that create the illusion of what you are actually seeing in front of you. If you do that, then the viewer's brain can click into place and say, okay, I understand what is happening. I can fill in the blanks. And I know what you are trying to describe. Okay, so all of those have to do with texture, and you will have an exercise that is sort of a texture scavenger hunt. So go ahead and look for that.